Thank you, Chrissy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Lori Salganikoff, Executive Director of the Chestnut Hill Conservancy. The Chestnut Hill Conservancy is a member-supported community advocate dedicated to protecting and celebrating the historical, architectural, and cultural resources and open spaces that define the unique character of Chestnut Hill and other communities in the Wissahickon watershed. Tonight, we are proud to present a virtual lecture by Hans Hesselein and Martha Keene from Apiary Studios, who will be speaking about sustainable landscape design using recycled materials. I'd also like to thank Chrissy Clausen, our Programs and Communications Manager, for organizing tonight's event, along with our program committee, co-chaired by Jean McCroubry and Susan Peck, and the entire program committee for their dedicated efforts. Hans, could you please go to the lead and general sponsor slide? Thank you. This is one of our Ask the Experts programs, providing free expert advice related to historic home and landscape care. The Conservancy organizes this free program, which is offered in collaboration with the Chestnut Hill Community Association and made possible through the generous support of our lead sponsor, Chubb, as well as our general sponsor and sponsors and members. Hans, could you go to the Ask the Experts sponsor slide? Thank you. Thank you to our Ask the Experts event sponsor, Hearth Builders, and for the additional support from Wallace Landscaping Associates. Their contributions allow us to offer free educational programs like tonight's lecture. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to join us for Ask the Experts Case Studies in Restoration and Loss Prevention with Chubb Insurance's Kate McDougall and Pine Mar's Sean Swanson next Tuesday, October 29th. They'll discuss real-life examples of historic home renovations, loss prevention, and key considerations for insuring your home. And don't forget to cast your vote for our Chestnut Hill Architectural Hall of Fame. The Chestnut Hill Architectural Hall of Fame recognizes our community's most significant buildings, structures, and landscapes voted on by the public. These iconic places stand out for their design, craftsmanship, or historical importance. But this is a nice way to draw attention to these fabulous treasures. The voting is open until November 15th, and winners will be announced at on December 3rd at our preservation party. We will be putting the link for that to see those properties and vote on your favorites in the chat. For more details on both, you can also visit the Conservancy's website. Now, please make sure you've muted yourself. And we invite you to add any questions you have during the program in the chat for the Q&A that will follow the lecture, moderated by landscape architect, program committee member, and Conservancy board member, Rob Fleming. You can also note the slide numbers in your questions if you think that'll be helpful. But please do put your questions in the chat rather than calling them out during the program. I'd like to welcome our friends at the Chestnut Hill Community Association. Laura Lucas, the board president, is here to say a brief hello. Following her remarks, Chris Lux from Hearth Builders, our event sponsor for the evening, will introduce tonight's presenter. Laura?
Hi, everyone. Thank you to my friends at the Chestnut Hill Conservancy for organizing a great program like this about sustainability and green space. Areas that I'm very passionate about as well. So thank you to our friends there. And it's great to be a community partner along with the Conservancy for these programs. So this is a great series. Hope you enjoy it. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Lux at Hearth. So thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. I'm Christopher Lux, sales manager here at Hearth Builders. I've been with the company about a decade. Come July, been part of lots of projects in Chestnut Hill and Mount Airy. It's a company we really enjoy working on the older homes, and not just the work involved to make them work for the way we live today, but to honor their architectural significance and the nice charm that we all enjoy so much. And that passion's kind of what led us to want to stay in front of this great community of people and support the Conservancy's Ask the Experts program. So we thank you for being here and helping this initiative thrive. It's a really wonderful thing. And tonight we have some awesome guests. Hans Hesselein, a registered landscape architect who studied at North Carolina State University, has extensive experience in sustainable design and urban conservation, has worked internationally in that capacity, and served as executive director of the Gowanus Canal Conservancy in Brooklyn, New York, which is pretty sweet. Also, Martha Keene, graduate of St. John's College, as well as the professional gardener program at Longwood Gardens, and currently serves as the horticulture manager at Apiary Studio. Over a decade of experience in working in city parks and public gardens, including Prospect Park in New York and Wick here in Philadelphia. So just really great experience amongst these two. Should be a really enlightening chat tonight. They're going to share with us their approach to giving recycled materials and disused spaces a second life. Discuss the design challenges and opportunities of working with materials from demolition sites, with scraps, with cutoffs. We'll highlight the importance of thoughtful craft and sustainable construction and landscape design, and show us how the lightest touch can often lead to the most impactful solutions, which is a great little tagline. As Lori mentioned, following the presentation, Rob Fleming will lead the Q&A session. So just to reiterate, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And with that, I will hand it back over. Thanks for being with us tonight.
All right, here we go. Chris, thanks so much for that flattering introduction.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thanks to the folks at the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, Lori, Chrissy, Rob, Jean. We're really grateful to have the opportunity to present tonight and to have an ongoing relationship with your great organization. Again, I'm Martha. I'm here with Hans, and we've got about an hour-long presentation ahead, which Hans is going to outline briefly.
So this is a talk. It's pretty tactical. It's very much a how-to talk. This is an emerging approach to landscape design and construction for us, stemming from our interest in doing good things by the environment and designing sustainable landscapes. The talk's going to be broken down into 5 sections. The first one is pretty brief. It's about us, so that you get to know who we are at Apiary Studio. The second section is about our ethos, the things we think about when we're designing and approaching projects. The third section is the shortest. It's 1 slide. In fact, it's about other people whose work has inspired our own. So that's precedents of other recycled landscape designs. The 4th section is about methodologies. That's really a nuts and bolts conversation about different ways and strategies that we found to reuse and recycle materials. And then finally, the bulk of the presentation is section 5, our 4 case studies, where we really dive deeply into 4 projects that we built in Philadelphia.
All right, here we are at the first section. We started Apiary Studio almost 10 years ago. Next month, we're celebrating 10 years in business, which feels like an achievement. But the company looks very different now than it did when we first started. At that time, we were only performing traditional design services, no construction. The image on the screen shows an example of the type of rendering style we use, as well as how we communicate graphically our vision for the types of sites that we started when we were, or excuse me, that we were working on when we first started, which is a lot of high-end residential homes in and around Philly.
As a tradition, when we were working in a more traditional sense, we designed a lot of projects that other contractors would build at various sites in the Northeast, between Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and New York, I would say. So we're accustomed to drawing and designing things that other contractors have built. We also, whether as a designer or as a design build firm, which is how we're focused now as a business, we've always been really, really interested in detailing and craft and the the ways in which materials are assembled and put together, that's something that we've always geeked out about, whether just as designers or as builders as well. When we first began to dip our toes in the construction side of the landscape business, it was really just to install the planting layer after other contractors would build all the hardscape items for our clients. And the reason we did this was because we have the habit of specifying pretty diverse and somewhat esoteric plant mixes in a lot of the projects we work on. And we had a very hard time finding landscape contractors who were willing to source this material and go to multiple nurseries in order to get all the plants that would be required to fulfill the design. It's not uncommon for our projects to need to get plant material from up to 5 different nurseries in the region in order to complete the garden. Around the time of the pandemic, so I would say 6 years into our business or so, 5 or 6 years, we shifted fully into design build, and we're now a landscape contractor and a landscape architecture company. This was partially out of necessity. I think, you know, the economy went haywire at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were trying to figure out how to keep things moving with a lot of projects drying up. But really, the most important thing is that we love construction. We love building things. We love working with our hands. And being a design build company, we find to be really, truly fulfilling creatively and professionally.
It was because of making the decision to switch to the design build model that we've been able to niche down on a real ethos, because we were constantly confronted when we began working in construction with one big elephant in the room, which is concrete. Concrete is the figurative and literal foundation of all of human civilization for many hundreds of years. To bring it back to contemporary times and in Philadelphia, what we were encountering above all else in our practice was just these excess of concrete waste. And over the years, this confrontation with waste, whether in usable forms, like great things being thrown out, or in seemingly unusable forms, we developed this sort of ongoing dialogue that eventually started to become the underpinning of our entire practice. And we're going to encapsulate some of that here in like short list of points. These points, I would say, apply to any single project that we work on right now, not just ones whose main driver is using recycled materials. And I think you'll see that they can apply to just about any project that we might share with you today. The first one is to strive to use affordable and accessible materials. In the instance of concrete waste, affordable equals free. It's just foolish to think that we could possibly throw out everything forever. We can't fill up landfills forever, and that's the main simple driver of that point. The second point is there is no way. Similar to the first point, it's just not sustainable to imagine that there's an alternative. Point number 3, reduce carbon and energy input wherever possible. When you reuse concrete, you can recapture about 95% of its embodied energy that would otherwise be pilfered if that material were thrown out instead. Embodied energy is not just the energy that goes into producing a material, but all of the energy that goes into such tasks as getting that material from the mine or the concrete plant to your job site. There's a lot of carbon in that process as well. The fourth point, respect the labor and craft of previous artisans. anyone who's attending a Chestnut Hill Conservancy event would know just how rich this city in particular is in beautifully handcrafted materials. This is a bit of a cheeky photo on the screen. It was part of a temporary show garden that we did at the Philadelphia Flower Show a few years ago when it was outside. But it shows it's an example of exactly the kind of material we dig out of the ground anytime that we dig a hole here. There's a marble lintel on the screen. There's cobbles that were used as ship ballast. The bricks we have on the screen are maybe a bit beat up, but we pull up beautiful bricks all the time. Wissahick and schist. I don't use a photo on the screen to show an example of a well-built wall so much as to show like there's an embarrassment of riches that we're throwing away.
Other approaches to design that help underpin our work, I would say, is it's really important to us that when we're designing a landscape that we pay attention to and try to respond to the context within which it exists. So in Philadelphia, that means looking at the neighborhood where the project is sited, looking at the housing stock or the buildings around it, and trying to design things that feel sympathetic. We have done a lot of projects in formerly industrial sections of the city, like the image that you see on the screen here, where this the aesthetic of the reused or reclaimed material feels very at home and very sympathetic to the environment that we're working in. We also feel that when we approach designing a site, point number 6, that we don't want to treat it as a carte blanche, that we don't want to erase everything there and create something wholly new. This is something that as a designer, I've had to really come to terms with over the course of my career. When I was a young designer starting out, my first impulse oftentimes when designing a new garden or a landscape for a project site was to try to erase all of the weird idiosyncrasies and impose a clean, rational order over the site. It looks so good in a drawing. But what I found now that I'm more or less at the midpoint of my career is that for me, the more interesting challenge is to try to work a new landscape concept in and around a lot of the existing elements that are worthy of preservation, and to try to embrace the idiosyncrasies that almost every site presents. The photos on this slide show just that. We were working for a developer in West Philadelphia who had purchased an old garage, an enormous garage, and the entire triangular site was bound in these concrete walls, which used to be the exterior walls of this garage complex. The developer was building a 60-unit, 10-story apartment building, and we were designing and then building the outdoor space for the tenants. The original plan that the civil engineer developed for the site was to tear down the walls that were all situated around the border and to replace them with a new wooden privacy fence. When we arrived at the site for our initial site walk and we saw these walls in place, I thought, wow, those are so cool. Look at the texture, the character, the history, the graffiti, the things that make these walls so interesting and dynamic. We would be crazy to knock these down, because not only would it cost a lot of money, but also the wooden privacy fence that would replace them would be smaller, would provide less privacy, and there's no way you could ever achieve the kind of intimacy and the depth of character with this space if you started from scratch. And so we were able, it was a very easy job to convince the developer to leave them in place, and I think the landscape that resulted was much richer for it. This also ties into our next point, number 7, of protecting site history and revealing cultural narratives. The more that we can leave in place when we're building and designing a new landscape renovation, the more of the site's history we can also keep in place, the more of a narrative will be preserved and revealed through that process. And so there's continuity over time from pre-modern to modern and now contemporary landscape design on a site if we're able to keep a lot of those elements in place. And then finally, something that helps guide our work, which is pretty obvious but worth saying, I think, is that enduring design is more sustainable. We try not to be too trendy with our work, for fear that trendy design decisions, trendy elements are like a flash in the pan, are more likely to be changed by somebody else in short order. And so if we create things that are beautiful, they will be more lasting and therefore inherently more sustainable than something that needs to be flipped and changed in the future. This is our one slide precedent section where we would like to just pay brief homage to some of the designers who we really, really respect and who have taught us quite a bit through the example of their work. Rich Haig was a pioneering landscape architect whose work to preserve the Gasworks Park just outside Seattle in the mid-70s was really the first project I was ever made aware of where industrial preservation was a goal. Building on that, you see the image on the bottom left-hand side of Landschaftspark Duisburg Nord, which was built in the Ruhr Valley in Germany in the early to mid-90s. It was designed by Peter Latz. What's incredible about this is that a steel mill went out of business and was abandoned, and they designed this whole very light touch, massive landscape park that preserved the vast majority of the steelworks in place and turned them into essentially an outdoor playground for adults and for children. It's like if you've ever been to the steel stacks in Bethlehem, it's like that, but about 10 times the size. We definitely want to acknowledge the work of Julie Bargman. That's the image in the upper right-hand corner. Her design for the campus master plan at the Urban Outfitters headquarters down in the Philadelphia Navy Yard. This is the first time I'd ever seen recycled materials reincorporated into a landscape design. It's a masterwork, and it happens to be in our backyard. So if you have not been to the Navy Yard, which is publicly accessible down in South Philly near the stadiums, I recommend visiting it. Her work is amazing. And then finally, a firm that is working right now, they're more or less contemporaries of ours, Wagon Landscaping. They're based in Paris, France. Their work is also incredible. It's less massive in scale, I would say, to the previous designers I mentioned, but way more detailed on the horticultural level. And that's something that Martha and I really, really also geek out on is plant material. And their work incorporating urban adapted plants is amazing.
All right. We're now at the next section of our talk which is methodologies. And we're going to go through the handful of these using some of our own work to illustrate the points of what it actually means to recycle a landscape. Point number one is that wherever possible, we recommend using existing site soils. The project on the screen is a sort of rehabilitation nonprofit for veterans in Kensington. And specifically, this was a courtyard site. And the way that we encountered it is the upper left hand of the screen, which is frankly the way that we encounter a lot of sites that we end up working on. It looks beyond repair, but we opted not to just pull in a couple of 10-yard dumpsters and throw out all of this soil. Obviously, you have to go in first and weed and grub out to the best of your ability. In certain instances, if soil is really compacted, you may work it with a rototiller and incorporate some soil amendments such as compost. But by and large, we try and select a plant palette that is tolerant of high alkalinity like you'll have with soil that's full of masonry waste, and that can tolerate periods of intermittent drought, because many of these projects are budget projects that aren't going to be receiving irrigation or even, frankly, hand watering. And so we've come up with the strategy of using existing site soils by adapting the plant palette to suit. Functionally, what that means is that for the first year or two after install, you have to have a maintenance regime in place to keep the weeds from taking over. But after that point, our maintenance tends to go down sharply as the landscape comes into maturity.
Methodology 2, we call addition by subtraction. This is a method that we've developed for our most urban sites. This is not going to be as common in Chestnut Hill as it is in other parts of Philadelphia, but we will frequently encounter a site where the entire front yard, side yard, backyard, everything is paved, 100%. And so the clients who are hiring us are often very interested in tearing out the old unsightly concrete and putting in beautiful new paving and gardens. And the budgets don't always exist for a full renovation in that scale. And so we have found that by using very precise and almost surgical use of a demolition saw, a concrete saw, we can not only remove hardscape that's impermeable and create green space, but we can also kind of elevate the appearance of the existing concrete or the existing hardscape and make it more satisfying and certainly appear more intentional. The whole idea here is that you have to, you have to use really good craftsmanship. You have to be meticulous in the way that you demo and remove things. But by being careful, by being deliberate, it does really help to make what was previously unsightly paving into something much more tolerable, I would say, and even attractive. And these are some detailed shots of ways in which we tried to achieve this for a residential client in Fishtown, where, as I said earlier, the entire site was paved from front to back.
Third methodology is to recontextualize existing hardscape. This was a client of ours right off of Lincoln Drive, actually, in Mount Airy, who had recently purchased a home and wanted to put in a new garden in the backyard. And there were a lot of disparate hardscaping elements, which are on the screen here. You can see that there's like slate pavers, there's schist, bluestone, cobbles, imitation brick, like precast dyed concrete pavers, and so on. And before doing anything, we stockpiled and took account of all those disparate hardscaping elements, which are in that bottom right hand of the screen. The next thing that we did was just develop a very simple schematic design. One advantage of being a design build operation, and especially when you're working on a really small scale like a homeowner's backyard, you don't always have to develop complex CDs. And because this was a young family who was working on a budget, this is about as complicated as our drawings got for this particular project. Again, you can't do that in every instance. And we were able to pull some schematic level pricing for a job of this size. And unsurprisingly, there was a bit of sticker shock about what it would cost to pave all the areas that you're seeing in blue here with traditional stone paving, which is when we kind of twisted the client's arm and said, why don't we use all of this stuff that you already have? He trusted us and empowered us. And what I'm going to show you next is what we ended up doing with exactly that stuff that we pulled out as trash. Our main mission with these ragtag mix of materials was to add rhythm and visual continuity. So the cobbles, it made sense to relegate them to bed edging, and that's what you're seeing here. We've also kind of delineated, okay, these are the planting areas, these are the raised bed areas, and so on. And we decided that we would set all of the remaining paving into a stone dust base. That gave us some flexibility to have some negative area because we didn't know exactly how much square footage we'd get out of these pavers. And what you're seeing here is, I think, a pretty approachable project, even for somebody who might want to do this themselves at home. In addition to being garden edging, the cobbles became the sort of threshold paving anytime you were coming in a gate or through a door. The broad, cool colored slate and bluestone pieces lined that straight axis between backyard and, or excuse me, the garage and the back door. And then the random sort of warmer tones bled out into the stone dust. This is the garden basically right after we walked on the site. The plants are still pretty young, but I don't know that as an outsider, I would look at this site and hone in on the fact that the paving was random. In fact, I think it looks a bit more special this way because it has a bit more character and patina. Here's just a couple of more images a little bit later on through that same year to illustrate again, the paving doesn't, the choice of paving doesn't need to be maybe as much of a visual driver. The point of paving is that it kind of fall into the background. So it's a great example of using what you already have.
This next methodology is, we call it importing wastes. So on the previous slide, or the previous case study, Martha was talking about finding treasures on site and reincorporating them into a design. In this instance, we designed a project for a client who liked our aesthetic and approached us and said, I really like your recycled materials. Can you build something for me? But we had to find wastes somewhere offsite and bring them in. So in this case, we designed a series of raised vegetable beds in the backyard that we used saw cut concrete slabs to form the edging. And what we did is we found a pile of concrete waste essentially, drew very careful lines on them, cut them into 2-foot wide sections, turned them on their edge, and then set them in a very shallow concrete footing and mortared the joints to kind of hold them together. And then this became the raised edge for the vegetable bed. What I love about this material, next slide, is that you get all these different faces to the concrete. So you have the tooled or brushed surface, the walking surface of the concrete. You get the saw cut edge, which reveals almost a terrazzo-like interior of the concrete. And then you get that rough underside facing the planting that took on whatever form the sub base was when the concrete was poured. So you really have a richness of texture to work with when incorporating that material into a project.
Similarly, you might choose to use architectural salvage. This is another former factory site in Kensington on D Street, which was a former carpet mill. And because it was a factory setting, there were stacks and stacks and stacks of diamond plate sheets, which were kind of a traction for people who were standing for periods of time doing dangerous tasks. We opted to help the owner of this site turn some of these sheets of metal into garden edging. And as a way to avoid kitsch, or it's not the word I'm looking for, as a way to avoid being cliche, I suppose is the word, when using architectural salvage, it helps to not just plunk something down and call it a day. In this instance, we bended the edge of the sheets to add some strength to the design, as well as some intentionality and effort. So I think that's one risk that's involved when you use salvage, is you need to be thoughtful in how you're readapting it to a new purpose.
Okay, we're gonna talk about some case studies now, the kind of meat of the presentation. This is the first project, one of our earliest commissions in Philadelphia, working for a homeowner who had renovated a former pickle factory to be his home. He worked with an architect, Bright Common, based in Fishtown, Kensington area, to design a passive house, which means extremely energy efficient. And he hired us to design a landscape that expressed a similar commitment to sustainability, but through the outdoors. When we arrived at the site, this is what we found. There was one nice tree, a specimen paperbark maple in the backyard that we kept, but largely there were very few elements that needed to be preserved on the site, but there was a lot of rubble that we could reclaim and use in our design. The design of the garden, essentially, here's the entrance from the house into the yard. It's a side yard. We placed a patio and low seat wall right outside the entrance so that this would be like the grilling, gathering, entertaining area. The backyard is more the garden and a tool shed. And then the front third of the property was going to be a parking space with kind of an entry walk. When we got to the site first, this whole, I would say, first half of the site was paved with a relatively new concrete slab. And we knew that the homeowner only needed one parking space. And so we were going to remove a lot of that concrete. And the task was just to design it in an attractive way. These are some images showing design sketching and some of our early renderings when we were working on these types of projects. You can see we've got a seat wall that I'll show you what it's made out of shortly, and a rubble patio at the center. So here's the slab that was in the front half of the property that we saw cut and turned into really beautiful chunks of concrete for the wall. Here's the foundation for the seat wall and us reincorporating a lot of crushed rubble from the site to be the base for the paving. Here we are saw cutting and removing sections of the new slab in the front yard. I love this process because it shows how some of the tooling that needs to go into making these pieces so nice, but you really get a sense for this kind of terrazzo look on the concrete when you saw cut it. This was early on in our explorations before we were using really any equipment, and so we had to improvise some interesting ways, like using car jacks for extracting some of these slabs out of the ground. We're a little more sophisticated about it now, but this is what we ended up with in terms of the concrete seat wall. So you get that really nice saw cut face facing you, and we chose to alternate the smooth tooled edge face of the concrete with the rough underbelly in our stacked wall pattern, but there are myriad other patterns that you could explore using these same materials, but with different masonry techniques for the wall patterning. Here's a look at the rubble paving that we built. There are no drains in the yard, but there's never any standing water. The permeability of this paving method has been great, at least in this situation, and the homeowner's really pleased, and we're thrilled with how it's turned out. A beautiful, durable garden in Fishtown.
The second case study we have is called Liberty Landscape, for the fact that it is immediately adjacent to Liberty Lands Park in Northern Liberties. I've never said the word liberty so many times in a row. And it was a priority for the homeowner, as well as a precedent for the person who she had purchased her new home from, that the sites are mirrors of one another. So Liberty Lands, for anyone who doesn't know, was basically claimed by a group of community members as a privately owned public park, right in the midst of what is now very, very, very coveted real estate in a rapidly changing area. Liberty Lands is dominated by a lot of DIY techniques to garden making because it was built from scratch by volunteers. So you'll see a lot of cinder blocks, handmade murals, homes for birds and wildlife and habitat. The pictures on the screen happen to be when it's maybe in the off season, but it's a vibrant, warm, and wonderful place. Our project site specifically was defined by two challenges. One, it was a awkward triangular shaped corner lot, a pretty acute angle. And second, there is a really, really large silver maple in the yard whose roots were permeating just about every surface. The other point that I would make by showing these before photos is that there was a lot of material on site, and we would go on to use the site as our mine, basically. We did not, in any of our paving, bring in any new material for this project. You can see that there's a pile of sidewalk slabs leaning against the building. There's clawfoot cast iron bathtubs. There's a lot of brick in the area around that silver maple tree, and other things, which I'll show as we go through this set. Again, a simple example of how we communicate our schematic level designs to our clients. In this case, we knew that there would need to be a parking pad. Street parking is increasingly difficult down there, and so the patio would double as a place to park. We knew that there would be garden beds, which is why the roots of that silver maple would prove to be a little bit problematic. And that there would be some spill out places for more private hanging out in the back. The site always gets worse before it gets better. And what we're doing here is trying to rectify the grade. There was a slight slope to the property, and we knew we would need to navigate that by stepping down our edging, which in this case was steel. And by adding just a couple of inches of garden soil, which would be restrained by that edge, we had some more friable planting area to add garden beds without suffocating the tree. Here's the parking pad that I mentioned. We ended up using those stone slidewalk slabs that were already on the site, but we knew that they would crack under the weight of a parked car, especially a car that was turning to get into position. And so we used soldier courses of bricks turned on their side to serve as a guide for the wheels because the parking space was pretty tight. And also bricks would do a better job of deflecting the weight of a heavy car. There are a lot of other areas where we ended up reusing all of the bricks that we pulled out on the site. And again, this is not like a textbook example of beautiful brickwork, but taken into consideration that these are where trash toters would be sitting. The photo in the lower right would be covered with garden furniture. I think there's no reason why that material would need to be brand new. We used a couple of pieces of rubble concrete to serve as stepping stones between that parking pad and the private back patio. And by the time that the plants grew into place, they are completely obscured from view, or they're rough edges where you would not know that they were trash. And these are some dormant photos to close out the site, in keeping with the dormant photos I had of Liberty Lands, but just wanted to show you what it looked like all brought together. We also had a garden shed on this property. This was built out of new materials, but there's a green roof on that, which can be seen from the upper floors of the house. And on this screen, I just wanted to show that this is another instance where we couldn't possibly draw out every single detail that goes into a project like this. It's important to have a really empowered and trusted relationship between the person on our team who's designing and the person on the team who's building the site. In some instances, it's the same person. When Hans and I were just starting out, it was literally Hans and I drawing these things and constructing them. But a blueprint would not really help a craftsman or a mason putting this thing together. You need to empower them to make field decisions. And in this case, we had just a wonderful builder working with us by the name of Teddy, a former employee of ours. The next project is a commercial one, which is called Perrystead Dairy. The building highlighted in that line work was the former power plant to the larger factory, that U-shaped building behind it. The client in this case is an urban cheesemaker, Yoav Perry, whose line of cheese called Perrystead is been on the market for maybe 5 years now. This building, this little power plant building, was to become his cheese making kitchen. And the space in the foreground where there are 2 shipping containers, he wanted to be a dooryard and entrance garden to the site. As you can see, we did not have much to work with. There was only up to go in terms of the potential for this site. But because this was an entrepreneur who was having to take out a lot of loans and spend a lot of money to turn a disused, empty building into a sterile, hermetically sealed cheese cave, laboratory, basically, it will come as no surprise that he didn't have a lot of cash to put into the entrance, which would really be like an important part of the receiving area of the site. And so he came to us because he knew we would be thrifty. This was again earlier in the time of our genesis as design build contractors, and I think he picked the right ones because we were able to help him build something out of nothing. So here are some schematic designs. In addition to being a beautiful entrance dooryard, it needed to be able to accommodate the delivery of raw milk from Pennsylvania dairy farmers, as well as have the option of being impromptu party and perhaps farmers market spaces, which is why we've broken it out into stalls. Additionally, the site had a gradual slope, and so we knew there would need to be some amount of terracing to retain soil if that middle aisle was indeed going to be ramped up from this curb to the door of the building. Here we are on day one, just sort of seeing what's there and rectifying the grade. That's the client's daughter in the foreground playing Barbies in the gravel. Hans and I joke a lot that she's going to be our boss one day. She was amazing. And that's Teddy, our coworker, in the background on that skid loader. Our client was really enticed by the idea of using Corten steel, that sort of rusty, posh steel, to be these retaining edges of those terraces. But the cost of the steel alone, to say nothing of the plantings, the labor, any soil we would need to bring in, whatever, exceeded his project budget by exponential amounts, tens of thousands. And it was at that point that we twisted his arm, as we so well do, into the thought of using rubble instead. Again, because the idea is that plants can do the heavy lifting in a project like this if you pick the right ones, and the retaining and the engineered sort of bulky masonry can fall into the background. It's not about that. Here we are on planting day. We opted to make a gravel garden out of this project. This is another project with nary a hose bib on the site, and because the inside of this building, where there was a source of water, had to be sterile for cheese making, we never once pulled a hose out to water anything here. In light of that, we had to pick plants that were suitable to really dry, arid conditions. We ended up picking a pretty Mediterranean palette of aromatic and culinary plants. one advantage that I've learned from a friend of mine, Eric Sue, about using mineral mulches, such as gravel or stone dust, is that you can create microclimates because the soil takes some of the humidity out of the air down at plant level. And you can see our rough courses of rubble paving here before we spread out the rest of the grit.
Also mentioned the relationship between the planting and cheese making.
Yeah, one other fun fact that we learned in this project is that cardoons, which are relatives of artichokes, are actually a vegetarian rennet when you are making cheese. And so that was another driver for the sort of Mediterranean vibe of this garden, is that we should throw in a lot of cardoons because it was a dairy. I like this photo set because it showcases the power of plants. If you go counterclockwise, this is year 1, which is very small budget plants in 2-inch pots. Year 2 on the bottom left, and year 3. Plants really were the main character in this garden, and I'm gonna move through some other images of some portfolio photos to show you just how much they carry in a garden that was otherwise built from trash we pulled out of the ground. Perrystead Dairy became notorious this year by putting a cheese vending machine in the middle of, or I should say on the side of this garden. And so you can buy cheese from a refrigerated vending machine 24/7. That's a sort of fun factoid. This garden was on the cover of New York Post this summer because of the vending machine. There we go. And we're next going to move on to our final case study and wrap up the presentation. Hans, take this one away.
We call this project the Space Barn because of the sort of stark modernity of the building. This is one of the only projects, certainly the only project we're going to show you tonight, but one of our few projects that actually has a connection to a natural area, in this case, Wissahickon Park. And that influenced our planting design quite a bit. Like in the previous slide Martha showed you, we weren't being super native focused. It was mostly Mediterranean plants. But in this project, we felt that it was really important to use a lot of native material. The house had been designed and built for an owner maybe 10 years ago, and it was sold to a new homeowner who is a writer by trade, and she wanted to build a writer's cabin for her to work in the backyard. And that's when we got called in, because the second homeowner really wanted to make some landscape investments in the property. When we arrived at the site, you can see it here. Despite being on the edge of the Wissahickon, it was mostly characterized by invasive plants, princess tree, tree of heaven, porcelain berry, etc., Japanese knotweed. It was just a messy tangle of invasive plants. And so our work here has been, we've been working here for several years now to kind of manage and beat back a lot of the invasive pressure and to try to establish a much better native ecosystem. But our first big push was to establish the hardscapes at the house. And I want you to understand, so here's the property in our landscape design. You can see the existing home right here. It's kind of H-shaped, and then there was the writer's cabin was placed in the backyard at a very kind of tense angle to the building. And we felt that our job as the landscape architects on this project was to create a beautiful space that the homeowners could enjoy, but also to try to help resolve the tension between the two structures. And so we designed a very large outdoor terrace that kind of the house opened up onto, that was the form of which was generated by the angles of the writer's cabin. And then it was punctured by a dining terrace, which led right off of the kitchen, which responded more directly to the angles of the house itself. And we felt that you know, I think it was a really successful resolution of those two competing geometries. Again, here's more photos of the construction process, the kind of messy landscape that was on site before we began. Here we are importing wastes to the site, which we mined from a facility in West Philadelphia.
As well as pulled out of the ground.
Yeah, on the site. Yeah, the site was, at some point in its history, it must have been owned maybe by a contractor who did a lot of work with the city of Philadelphia, because we found beautiful granite curbs just buried on this site. When they were digging out the foundation for the writer's cabin, these just beautiful 10-foot long, 3-foot tall granite curbs just appeared, which we were able to easily reincorporate into our design. But the bulk of the paving material and hardscape material came from a facility in West Philadelphia that was owned by a developer friend of ours. He had purchased a church that was condemned and knocked down by the city. And so we were able to mine this church that was imploded on the ground and use a lot of the stone to build our wall and a lot of the concrete rubble to form the basis of our paving on site. In the image on the right-hand side, you can see us kind of trying to precisely lay out very rough and tumble concrete edging to create a new curb and border for the patio.
Well, this might be a good chance to address a question I just saw pop up, because someone is asking, what is the base beneath all of this rubble paving? I think you can show it right now.
Yeah, the base under the paving it's always some form of crushed aggregate. Most of the time when we do this, we want the paving to be permeable so water can infiltrate through it. So we will use 3/4 inch clean gravel. For a pedestrian situation, I think a 4-inch depth gravel is sufficient, but if you're going to be driving cars on it, you usually want it to be 6-inch deep. Then we compact it we have a machine called a plate compactor, but there are lots of things that you can use to vibrate and compact the base material in place. Then we would lay 1 inch or 2 of 1/4 inch fine gravel, which serves as the setting bed. You would often use sand for brick pavers, but in this case, we use what's colloquially referred to as rice gravel by a lot of the rock suppliers for us around here, because it looks about like rice grains. For this project, I think one of the things that makes the paving a step up and an improvement over some of our earlier work, like at the pickle factory, was the size range of the pavers that we were able to incorporate. And that requires use of heavy equipment, oftentimes on site. And I'll show you a finished photo of the paving in a second so you can get a sense for the new improved composition. But here are some construction photos showing like the assembly of the drywall for the dining terrace. And here are some finished built photos of the project site. You can see the native kind of meadow-like perennial landscaping in the foreground. The Wissahickon Park is in the background behind the camera. Here's the front yard of the house.
It's actually, if you happen to be familiar with this site on Allen's Lane, the front yard is absolutely aglow with pink muley grass right now. Absolutely glowing.
Here's the writer's cabin in the backyard, designed by C2 Architecture, our friends and close collaborators. And here you can see our paving and the way it connects to that new outbuilding. Here are some of those granite slabs, curbs, which we cut down and incorporated into steps to navigate the grade from front yard to backyard. And then finally, here's this great shot of the paving that I was talking about. If you recall from the pickle factory slides, the paving was all concrete. It was of a similar vintage, and it was all about the same size. In this slide, what makes this paving composition, I think, more successful is first and foremost, we have such a range of sizes. So we have big, medium, small. That's really nice and visually appealing. We also have concrete from different sites around the city. So we have a strong variety of color and texture and finish in the concrete. And then finally, we infilled a lot of the larger open spaces between pavers with bricks and other finer details, which help to make it more intricate and attractive. And so with that, right at 8 p.m., remarkably, we're going to conclude the slides of our presentation, and we're going to open things up to Q&A. And I want to preemptively thank everyone who sat through this lecture, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it and maybe have some questions for us. So ask away, Rob.
Well, that was as terrific as I remember from the one time I've seen you give this presentation. Just great. There was a question that was answered already. A question about your approach to constructing from schematics. Do you often depart from the schematics? Does the design evolve as you do it in a way that the final product is quite different than the schematic, would you say?
Yeah, I will confess, we work more and more from construction drawings as we've matured, as our projects have gotten bigger, and the budgets have grown. We are spending more time developing construction drawings, or CDs, as Martha referred to them earlier. So it is not often anymore that we will just work from a schematic design. But yes, the design is always evolving. That's one of the great things about having multiple steps in the design process. You can iterate and iterate, and that's really the only way to arrive at a great solution, is to sketch and change and evolve. But also, because we're a design build company and we're really close with our staff and we trust them and they're amazing, and we're also designing during the construction process. And a lot of our colleagues who work with us, even in the field, are trained as designers. And so there's a lot of liberty that we give, that we share with each other in order to make design changes and decisions in the field based on what resources are available or challenging site conditions that we encounter. But the design process is iterative, and we're designing from start to finish, schematic through construction, I would say.
Well, here's a question about the build side of things. It appears that you are hands-on, down on your hands and knees, so to speak. First of all, is that true? And if so, have you had to learn how to use things like drive bobcats and use concrete saws and all these various kinds of equipment yourself?
Yeah, yes, our skills have grown, our familiarity with equipment hasn't increased. We're using equipment now. We own a small stand-on skid loader. We rent equipment when necessary, or if we have to use really big equipment, we will subcontract that work usually. But yeah, our tool repertoire, our material familiarity, all of those things have evolved and grown over time. And yes, we're becoming more familiar with that.
And with respect to these machines, you're self-taught mostly, right? Would you say?
I don't know of any school for machine
Machines?
operation to be, I mean, I guess there is a union school for that kind of stuff, but we're not in the union. So I think everybody I know is, like, you watch somebody do it and you learn on the job site, basically.
Yeah, seat time is what everyone says about tools, and well, maybe not about tools, but machines. I will say I'm a pretty low tech person. I have a real aversion to machinery, but my mind changed when it's a bit of a paradox because equipment is dangerous, but there's a lot of instances when using equipment makes a task safer for a body that would otherwise be lifting something that would take 3 or 4 strong humans to lift. So my tolerance for working with machines has increased because of that.
But I will say, Martha, I'm a boy and my inclination is to use machines. I love machines, like I have always loved them. But Martha keeps us honest, I would say, in the sense that, yes, my instinct is to use a machine. It's so much fun. However, machines destroy sites.
They destroy soil too.
And so we definitely try to be judicious and in our use of equipment on sites because it really makes a huge mess. And we try not to cowboy up too much and just drive things all over the place because it can alter a site forever, basically.
I have a question from an architect in our audience, Gene McCoubrey. Do you always try to use recycled salvaged wood, even if it's not available on the site?
No, and we didn't go over that in our presentation. I would say this recycled material work is a niche that we're developing, but it only represents about 25 to 30% of the work we do. We also create very conventionally beautiful things, I would say, modern or historic. You know, we are not only recycled trash people, but it is something that we wanted to talk about in this presentation and really focus on exclusively because we think it's interesting, but that is not the only thing we do, if that answers your question.
I don't know if anyone here is familiar with, I'm certain people in this audience are familiar with Manayunk Timber, which is an
Right.
urban sawmill. Like, there's a great supplier of reclaimed timber right in all of our backyards. It should make a great field trip or perhaps a future presentation. Because I would say our specialty is probably in the paving side of recycled landscapes.
Yeah.
But there are ways that can be extended to more materials than just paving.
Yeah, Manayunk Timber is amazing. Quick plug for them. They are sawing and milling huge beams and old boards salvaged from buildings and turning them into more useful dimensioned lumber, but they are also sawing and milling trees that have been felled in Philadelphia too. So yeah, their operation is incredible.
And they also recently planted a mini forest on their ground.
Yes.
Yeah, they took up a big portion of their own parking lot
Yeah.
and planted trees instead.
So questions are coming in. Have you ever had to turn down projects or clients because the visions didn't align?
I would say not for that reason. Sometimes when, the client is interviewing you and you're also interviewing a client. But by the time you're engaged in a design process with someone, it's clear that you're working together because you're simpatico. So I would not say that that happens often, but it does still happen that we need to convince people that when we say, like, it's okay, you can keep this slab, we're going to cut garden space out of it, that it'll still be a good project, and by the time we reach the end, everyone is really, really happy, but it's convincing them that you don't need to tear it all out and start over, or that we can reuse some of this concrete. I'd say that's where the real work is, but everyone is so far been really happy with the end result.
Yeah, and I would like to give credit to our early clients who hired us before we had a portfolio of successful projects to point to, because I would say they did definitely take some big risks when they let us build rubble landscapes for them. And I think that they're very pleased and it turned out very successfully, but there was a time where we did not have our own precedent work to point to.
You're getting some nice comments in addition to the questions. Here's a question. You sort of suggested that you don't, I'm reading a little into the question. You suggested that you make it so you don't have to do a lot of post work on maintenance. So the question is, do you normally maintain the garden for a year or so afterwards for the client?
It varies with every client, but garden maintenance is an arm of the services that we provide. And it's very typical that for at least the first, I will say, 2 years of a garden, that clients opt to have me come out about once a month during the growing season to just get everything established and also to do a bit of coaching with them. So yes, maintenance is definitely an arm of our services, and it's an important one with horticulture.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question, different subject. What are your goals with Apiary, particularly as you balance urban and open space-based projects and residential and public spaces? I guess the question is, how do you choose between, or what are your goals?
I would say, I feel comfortable saying that our niche or our target area is urban. A lot of landscapers steer away from working in urban sites and especially in disused sites because there are a lot of coordination complications with getting your machinery and raw goods and everything, parking, permitting. There are a lot of complications working in the city. You can't necessarily just phone it in and do what you always do. In terms of the breadth of the type of client between private homeowner and larger commercial or institutional or public space, we're striving all the time to do work that helps as many people as possible. And so I think our goal ultimately is to do more and more public work, but we do about equal parts of both.
Yeah.
A question of my own, and I think it will probably be the last one since we've gone through the ones on the screen, about gentrification. It's pretty clear that your early clients anyway were in gentrifying neighborhoods. And
Yeah.
how did you feel about participating in that?
Want me to take this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, Rob. I think it could be said that Hans and I moved to Philadelphia from New York City. We came here for practical reasons. I started a school program here, but we're part of a wave of people moving to Philadelphia and at the time taking advantage of a lower cost of living, a more accessible real estate market and so on. And there are people across the city that were here before us that have both benefited and have suffered from the new wave of development that comes in. Anytime you're working on development, that's the case. And the approach that we take in our business model is to try and make something better than it was before. In the case of almost all of the gardens we were building, we were putting in gardens where there was not even a disused garden, but not even a garden before. And that's one way personally that I help to confront that question in my mind. But it's, I think it's something that one should always be cognizant of, is how can I do the least amount of harm?
Good answer. Another question has come in. What are some of your favorite stories about salvaged materials that you've incorporated into your designs? And how did those materials add to the narrative of the spaces that you created?
Good question, putting us on the spot.
I don't think this is new knowledge, but one thing that I've learned digging, we're currently working with a great client called the Village of Arts and Humanities, right off of Germantown Ave in Nicetown. Some colleagues of ours, SALT Landscape Architecture, designed a big master plan that they've engaged with us to implement as the partner, the construction partner. And this, if anyone doesn't know, the Village of Arts and Humanities has a network, like a warren of empty lots that they've put beautiful sort of Afro-futuristic mosaics and murals upon as these sort of safe passages for school children and adults, but getting through the neighborhood between like the hub of the art center, which is the Village of Arts and Humanities, and then to the corner store, the main avenues, to their grade schools, the library, whatever. It's a really cool organization, but it's all built on this network of abandoned lots. And when we've been digging on the site lately, because we're putting in a new plaza and patio, you know that you're about to hit gold when you start seeing ash, because these were former privies that got filled in with trash over the year. And I actually have a blob top bottle that we pulled out of the site like last week. Like, you find treasures all the time. This is not something that will go, this is something for a prize shelf. Like, this is really, really cool. But one thing I've learned is, like, in your own backyard or whatever, when you start seeing cinders or ash, maybe keep digging, because it's very likely that you're going to find glass bottles, shards of pottery, old toys, coins, other relics in there. So yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, I think, as those privy explorers.
Yeah, and to build on that, there's something that I learned moving to Philadelphia that I did not realize, that there is a subculture of people. We're not among them because we're not that hardcore, but there is a subculture of people called diggers, who know where and how to find these privies, and they will dig down them, and they will be deep, 15, 20 feet deep, full of debris, and they will dig their way down to the bottom and extract, but find really cool and sometimes valuable things in these privies, because they were kind of your at-home, not just restroom, but trash disposal service as well. Or something might get dropped when you're using the facilities in a privy. But there are people called diggers who love to explore these things as a hobby in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you had to work with any archaeologists, like if you had uncovered something and they had to get in a consulting archaeologist to deal with it. Sounds like this is a quasi-archaeologist.
Not yet. I think it's more likely that, well, I know that happens from time to time, but I think it's also likely that you might encounter something like a buried oil tank or something that could cause just a hazard or whatever. So, like, there are all sorts of things. Before demolition and deconstruction was more tightly regulated, there's a lot of stuff underground that ought not be.
Yeah, sometimes you find things you don't want to find.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you ever had to stop because you had an identifiable toxic situation? I mean, like an old gas
Not
station?
yet.
Not yet, no, not yet, and certainly nothing like human remains or burial ground or anything. But there are other times when you dig just a hole and it's only red. It's like it's only brick dust. I mean, it's yeah.
And I won't share one more anecdote. We have Martha's brother-in-law is out here working with us this summer, and he's from Nebraska, and he's been digging. I mean, that's what we do. We dig a lot as landscapers, right? And he's been on these sites, and he's like, "What is in this soil? I can't, like, every time I put a shovel in the ground, a brick comes up, guys." And we forget sometimes that everywhere else outside of an old city like Philadelphia or Boston, you're working in real soil. But here in Philadelphia, we're just so used to it. And I'm sure everybody else, every home gardener on this presentation is used to it as well. Just like the soil is not truly soil. Oftentimes it's full of human artifacts.
There's a question here about your experience with nonprofit consulting and environmental planning as distinct from design. So do you collaborate with nonprofits as sort of advisors, so to speak? And if so, what unique challenges and opportunities does that represent?
Yeah, I mean, I worked at the Gowanus Canal Conservancy. I had the privilege of serving as the executive director. It's a Brooklyn-based environmental nonprofit. The Gowanus Canal is a Superfund site in Brooklyn, a notorious Superfund site. And so I think we love working with nonprofit organizations. We both have spent big portions of our careers working at nonprofits prior to founding Apiary Studio. We can help with grant writing and visioning, and I'd say our skills related to nonprofit consulting have to do with open space design and environmental planning, and it's not sort of generic nonprofit consulting, but any nonprofit that's dealing with the environment or the landscape or a neighborhood or has goals having to do with open space or the outdoor landscape, that is where we're most comfortable and happiest working, I would say.
You were a prize winner at the flower show last spring, I think, and you didn't talk about that. Could you tell people about that?
Boy, that was such a huge honor and a surprise.
We are preparing to do our 4th consecutive Philly Flower Show landscape exhibitor garden in March of 2025. We were so honored when we were invited to participate as designers in the show. It was always a bit of a mystery to us, like whether people were applying to exhibit or whether they were being invited or what the process was. So as it turns out, you're invited to participate because someone at PHS has recognized that your work might be a good addition to the show. We personally benefit so much, and the entire Mid-Atlantic region benefits so much from what PHS does to advocate, not just for horticulture and open space, but for horticulturists and gardeners and nursery growers, that we see our participation in the show as being a way to give back to an organization that's for 200 years has been giving to Pennsylvania. The show is fun though. It's really contrived. It's more like theater work than anything else. It's like building a set because it's indoors. So we treat those gardens as a real wintertime kind of team building and bonding activity for our crew. We have about 8 people all in at our company right now. And it gives everybody the chance, like we have got art majors among our people who can niche down on the sort of arts and crafts portion of the show. Everybody gets to have a sort of project within the larger vision. But yeah, we love participating in the flower show.
It also allows, there's a lot, it's not like a garden that we build for anybody else. So it really lets us be fun and creative and theatrical, as Martha said. It's a great creative opportunity too. So we love the flower show.
So you'll be back
We'll
next
be
year.
back.
We'll be back.
Great. Well, this was great. I was just communicating with Chrissy, and I think probably the questions have stopped coming in. There's oh, wait a second. Here's a late breaking question. Hope this is appropriate. I'm quoting. I was fortunate to serve on the board of the village for 16 years. I actually brought SALT to the table, SALT, all capitals. Everyone should check out the website and see what else is going on there now. Amazing place that you can visit. From Susan.
Here. Yeah. Check it out if you don't already know it. Thanks for that comment. And we agree, SALT is an awesome partner.
Salt is awesome and the village is incredible.
Great. Yeah, that's from one of our viewers. Okay, well, good. I enjoyed that. I appreciate your doing it.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're so privileged to have you guys in Philadelphia. You have the most wonderful spirit and just adds so much. And so thank you so much for gracing us with your presence here and your wonderful presentation and just all of the amazing things that you're bringing here. It's really inspiring. So thank you so much, and rooting for you at the flower show. At some point you should let somebody else win, but I hope I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. But thank you so much again for sharing all of this with us, and look forward to seeing your projects actually in person more and more around the city. Rob, thank you so much for doing such a great job at moderating the Q&A. This was one of our best Ask the Experts, just really fascinating. Thanks everyone for showing up tonight, to our program committee, Chrissy Clausen, and to CHCA, to Laura Lucas for partnering with us on this. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Good night.